The Shop to the Apartment. Written and read by W.P. Thrift. You can find me at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. Prologue: The Goddess and the Orb. A 1,000 years before the present day of this story, in the far southeast of a land that wouldn't be named North America for another 500 years, the land that the current inhabitants referred to as Turtle Island, the goddess's queen sister sat upon her ornate throne, draped in beads and seashell art, her people dancing around her, wearing bronze masks made in the image of Talanwa, the otherworldly giant raptor spirit bearing a long nose. They were chanting to her, but she had tuned them all out, like so much white noise. Many large, roaring bonfires encircled them, casting many shadows in all directions under this moonless night. The Cherokee people called her sister the Apportioner, the presider over all things, while referring to her as Unalanawi, the goddess of the sun. She had never stepped foot outside during daylight, so she found that title to be grossly wrong. When the two of them had first arrived from the Far East, across the ocean, and the native people witnessed their miracles, they were welcomed into this camp immediately. Word of the Great Spirit spread far and wide, and many tribes had begun to travel on long pilgrimages to bring offerings to them. Her sister, whose true name was Alcyone, found this cute, while she, Talitha, just found this to be annoying. She couldn't even step outside the large mound they were given as a sleeping chamber without everyone making a big fuss about it, such is what was going on right now. To add to the naming confusion, Talitha had recently stopped identifying herself by that name, preferring instead the name Somnium Febribus in Latin, or the fevered dream in English, a language that was still in its infancy. This came from the night terrors she brought to all around her ever since receiving the orb as a gift from a native tribe, a perfectly spherical object which felt like marble to the touch, but was in fact some kind of alien material, nothing of this world. She always kept it close to her heart, and even now it rested on her lap. She caressed it slowly with one hand. Of course, the neighboring tribe saw it as less a gift given to her, and more something she had stolen from them, and a good reason to go to war with her and every other tribe that would defend her to get back their great sacred object. But tomato, tomato. That orb was all she cared about. It's what brought her to this land. She had spent years convincing her sister that this voyage needed to be done, but had never brought up the orb. No one ever knew about it, except for her and her adviser, the light-skinned man who had come to her one night, and curiously told her that she was the one who had sent him. He was still here, now, lurking somewhere nearby. His body was completely obscured by a large tan, hooded robe. He had never revealed his face to anyone but her, and her sister was barely even aware of his existence. The tribesmen feared him, and had warned Unalanawi / Talitha / Febribus / there's actually a few more than that if you can believe it, of the bad spirits which clung to him, more so now than ever that they had begun to be haunted at night, waking after the most terrifying dreams, which all of their shaman took to be the most terrible of omens. They had not yet realized it was Febribus, not the cloaked man, who was the cause of all this. The cloaked man, or the Grand Designer as he sometimes referred to himself, spent most of his time deep underground, in the cavernous depths beneath a burial mound where the warring tribe's prisoners were kept. The Cherokee were not known for keeping prisoners, and, indeed, most of the people had no idea there were any prisoners. They were escorted underground by Febribus's most trusted guards in the dead of the night, The Grand Designer had personally requested them, assuring Fabribus that this was all part of her plan. She had no such plan, but he had never led her astray before. It had taken more than a little convincing before she had trusted him, initially, but the things he knew about her were so personal, she had no choice but to believe he was who he claimed. Someone sent by her. Perhaps, she theorized, an avatar of her in a higher realm, one that could peer into the future. She still wasn't clear on the details, and the Grand Designer chose every word he spoke with the utmost of caution and thought, giving her only the bare bones of what she needed to hear to convince her to take action. The fact that he was outside of his underground prison likely meant that he had some pressing business with her. It amused her to see him just beyond the bonfire's light, fidgeting and fighting the urge to stay away from the light. She knew he wanted her to go over to him to speak, so he could avoid emerging from the shadows altogether. So she teased him by staying put, surrounded by the tribesmen that worshipped her. For a time, at least. But she knew whatever the Grand Designer needed to say must be urgent, as he began to creep into the light. She began to rise up from her throne, to head over there and see him. But, strange, he was gone now.
"Doth he expect me to chase after him?"
Fabribus asked herself. A tribesman, wearing nothing but a loincloth and a freaky mask, suddenly rushed up to her and placed both his hands on either arm of the throne, putting his face far too close to hers and yelling in a strange tongue, one even she was unfamiliar with. She was about to yell at him to back off, when she recognized the mask he wore, a wax face surrounded by straw, so crudely called the booger mask. It was more commonly known as the Mask of Death.
"Ab extra?"
Fabribus demanded, directly translating to from without, or, most accurately, she was demanding to know,
"What is the meaning of this?"
Fabribus's voice boomed like thunder, but the tribesmen didn't shrink away from it as they once had. The man in the Mask of Death grabbed the orb from her, a very surprising move. She hadn't even been guarding it, as none of the tribe had ever shown any signs of aggression or hostility to her before. The man in the Mask of Death tossed the orb into a sack carried by a nearby shaman, and then threw himself into one of the bonfires to burn and die. Fabribus didn't know why, but his reasoning was that he now saw himself as impure, tainted, forever cursed now that he had handled the orb. The Mask of Death indicated his own impending death. He would sacrifice himself to get the orb away from her and beg his ancestors to forgive him by burning his now tainted flesh. Waving a hand with the intention of telekinetically snatching the sack away from the shaman, she realized that her own powers were failing her. She felt weak. She looked at herself, now, and saw the golden aura burning lightly across her skin. She hadn't noticed this before, due to the glow of the bonfires, and perhaps a little due to her own madness brought on by handling the orb. A creeping insanity that she was not at all aware of, but her sister had been observing for a long time now. Skipping straight to the accurate English translation, a voice as sweet as honey, but bathed in the bitter sting of venom, spoke to her. "I have discovered your prisons, sister. The mound will be destroyed, all entrances sealed, all guards within it trapped. Your Grand Designer, the devil's adviser you keep on your shoulder, will be sealed underground with them. This orb will be buried down there with them. It would be returned to its proper tribe, to be buried under their own sacred mound where it belongs. But they are no more. Your last secret attack on them was successful in wiping them completely out. I hope their blood satisfies you,
because I would hate to see your soul suffer in death. Sister!
Fabribus begged. She couldn't see where her sister was, hidden away amongst the tribesmen which surrounded her, still dancing in their long-nosed masks. It was a ceremony of binding, which she would have known if she had bothered to learn much of anything about them, since she had arrived here more than a year ago now.
You would murder me?
We both know that that is impossible. Alcyone, her sister, the goddess queen, spoke. You must be imprisoned as well, but I shall try and put your mind to sleep, so that an eternity, locked underground, does not grate on your sanity any more than that cursed orb already has. Fabribus slowly smiled.
Then lock me away with the other prisoners.
Do not take me as a fool, Alcyone scolded. You cannot be buried in the same place as that accursed orb. Fabribus tried to run, but the golden aura covering her skin, a magic dampening field which her sister had cast on her, also weakened her muscles. Several tribesmen rushed in to grab her, and she was too weak to resist them, as 4 of them, 2 on each side, ran her towards the burial mound, wherein her eternal prison had been prepared. Her dark plans were foiled. Had she been careless, or had someone betrayed her? How did her sister put all of the pieces together? How much did her sister even know? Surely she couldn't have learned of her final goal, the singular spoken word from the grand designer, which, back home across the sea, had convinced her that all of this would be worthwhile. Fabribus may never get the answer to those questions, as she could feel her consciousness begin to slip when her sister's slumbering spell began to take hold. What Fabribus would not see is that after sealing the mound shut, the Cherokee tribe would flee this area, migrating far enough away that their shamans could guarantee them safety from the tainted land, the land which would forevermore grow nothing but monsters and death from its soil. The land that her sister, Alcyone, in all her guilt, would stay behind on, guarding her sister's prison for eternity, if need be. Alcyone grieved for her sister every night until she had no tears left to shed, and then grew bitter and hateful herself. She had warned travelers and migrating tribes to stay away from the accursed land, right up until her bitterness had taken hold, and from there she began to welcome people to this land once more, so that they could suffer as she did. 1,000 years after Fabribus's imprisonment, a small Southern American town was built right on top of the Cherokee burial mounds. The town of Cattailville. That concludes the prologue of The Apartment. Tune in every Tuesday for new chapters. If you'd like to reach me, you can do so at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. That's LANTISARMSTRONG. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again for next week's chapter, King of the Wild Frontier.